Our next speaker, glasses, sorry about that, it's the aging population. Not that you people would know about that. So we have Johnny Mikas, Coast to Cascades field coordinator. Johnny lives here in Whistler, and he's done extensive backcountry trips in many of the more remote corners of the Coast to Cascades region. For over 30 years, really? 30 years, Johnny, guided in a number of Canada's premier northern wilderness areas that provided the privilege of encountering several hundred grizzly bears. A passion for wild places and wild animals has led him to has led him to be involved in the creation of several new parks. And participation in the land use planning process to see the sky in the northern region. Johnny worked on the LRMP process as a volunteer for a number of years with a bunch of other people in this room, and done so much for our area and for this thing in general. It's a pleasure to have him speak tonight. John?
So it's really great to see the place full and so many faces I know. And I was thinking earlier, it's really great that we're not trying to restore populations of moths and lichens, otherwise we'd have 3 people in the hall tonight. So. I'm curious, how many people in the room have seen a grizzly bear somewhere in their lives in the wild? So that's pretty good. And how many of you have seen a grizzly bear in the 5 population units that Tony was showing on the thing? That's pretty good. And what I find interesting, living in Whistler, is that there's people I talk to, and you talk to them about the number of bears in the area, and some people are surprised to hear that we have any grizzly bears at all in living close to Whistler because they've never seen one. And other people think of our wilderness backyard as a big area, and think that, well, we should have more bears than we do. So it's been interesting in taking on this project in the last 18 months or so to find that there's really polarized different points of view on where the bears in the area sit. What else can I talk about here? I tried to put 1 or 2 funny things in, so we'll see. I'll just talk about Coast to Cascades Grizzly Bear Initiative a little bit. There's a few slides, I'll breeze through when we get there. But it's a grouping of, I think, 9 organizations that kicked it off, and the intent is to see the recovery of these 5 threatened population units in Southwest BC. That is our focus. It's a wide variety of different groups in our coalition, from naturalist groups to the Pemberton Wildlife Association. We have provincial groups. We have local groups. We have a partner on the U.S. side of the border, Conservation Northwest, that is helping out on this side of the line. And they're also, part of their interest in helping us is a self-serving interest, and that is to see when we have more strong burgeoning populations of bears, they're hoping that some of our bears will spill over onto the American side. We also have in our coalition, as supporters, we have the Statliam First Nation has signed on as support, and we're interested in seeing many, many more groups and organizations join us and call for recovery of these populations. Yay! Okay, so now I can go fast through the first few slides. So Coast to Cascades was launched back in September. Again, the modus operandi, the reason for us being is to recover these 5 populations so we have self-sustaining numbers in perpetuity into the future. Local groups, provincial groups, First Nations, and our partners across the line. And we call ourselves Coast to Cascades because these 5 population units span the area between the south end of the Coast Range and the north end of the Cascades Mountains. Tony already talked about extirpation and the shrinking range in the continent. We're not going to talk about that, but we feel that not only do we have a local interest to protect our bears, we are holding the line on extirpation moving up through North America. Extirpation being essentially local extinction, where the populations are lost in a region. And if we lose the bears in our 5 population units here, in the ones outlined in red there, it will be 5% additional, another 5% of British Columbia will be without grizzly bears. So it's really important on a continental basis. Tony referenced Yellowstone. The greater Yellowstone ecosystem is an example where recovery has been proven that it can work. It's a bit ironic that we're at risk of losing our bears on this side of the line, and they're actually getting bears back on their side. But back in the 70s, there was just over 100 bears, and they've managed them appropriately through a variety of measures, and recently there's over 600 bears. So they've done it there in probably a more challenging landscape, or at least as challenging a landscape, and we think we can do it here in Yellowstone. They did it, and they've also done it in other places in the Northwest states. So here's basically our corner of the world. Power lines, major highways. This color on there, that's basically the area of agriculture and ranching where there's no bears because of the development of that historic use. This is not a solid color. That's the roads, course shapefile of the roads network in southwestern British Columbia. So when you get out into this country out here, the roads are a lot denser, it's a lot flatter country, but all the roads go up pretty much most of the valleys in our neighborhood. When you get out east of the Chilcotin Mountains, this is the Chilcotin Plateau, this is what that sort of density looks like, because where there's roads, there's typically clear cuts, and this is not very, very friendly habitat for bears. Tony talked about displacement, that's a prime example. So the area up in here, this is the extirpated zone here and down in the Fraser Valley. This is where bears used to be, but there aren't anymore. And this is showing that a lot of our territory is rock and ice. The bluish colors are the rock and ice, so there's a lot of inhospitable territory for bears. And then we look at our Parks and Protected Area network. It is good. We've got some great parks, some real keystone parks, but they don't do everything for us. We're going to have to be managing bears between the parks and within the parks. And you look at the parks the way they're laid out, there's not perfect connectivity for bears in between them, so there has to be management on that. And a lot of our corner of the province is steep and it's rock and it's ice. That's up at the top of the Sioux, that's Little Ring Mountain looking north towards the Pembroke Ice Cap. And when you look at the parks, how they're protected, or what's protected in the parks, there's a significant amount of rock and ice when we think about what's there. And so in the case of Garibaldi, it's not just half of those perfect for bears. There's only a limited amount of habitat within that half that is actually suitable for bears. So looking at the numbers, we see, okay, this is what's protected in each of the different population units, and some of them have pretty good numbers of bears. Tony was talking about North Cascades, maybe 6, maybe 1, pretty low numbers. Garibaldi Pit, well, there's a lot protected there, but again, just the simple metric of protection doesn't really tell the whole story. South Chilcotin is a threatened population, as Tony said, but it is, when that population builds, that's what's going to be spilling, like when you fill an ice cube tray at one end, fills the next one, fills the next one, fills the next one, starts coming down to us. Also the Toba Butte population to the west of us, that's another key source for bears. So I thought, while we're going to be showing pictures of bears, I'd show everybody how to tell the difference between a grizzly bear and a black bear. And you can look at the features for the grizzly bear on the right-hand side there, the shape of the ears, shape of the face, the hump, the claws. And for those people who aren't that familiar with grizzly bears, you're going to see a lot of pictures of grizzly bears, thanks to people like Steve in the audience today. So I meant to mention that I'm not a scientist. I'm just a guy who wants to see these bears preserved. And I'm also a guy who forgets to put photo credits on a lot of things. So I apologize to some people whose photos I use. But when you're out in the wilderness in Sea to Sky and Coast to Cascades, and you're out in the field, look for signs of grizzly bear when you travel, because they're out there if you know what to look for. This is last summer up in the upper Van Horlick, where they were digging for plants. This is along the Chilco River, where sometimes you'll be walking through the woods, walking through the alpine, and you'll see these places where, like, the grass is gone, the vegetation is gone, and that's where bears put their feet in the same place all the time walking. And more often than not, it seems, when you see that, it leads you to a tree where they rub on, and you'll find grizzly bear hair stuck to the pitch, stuck in cracks in the bark. And you get that in all kinds of different habitats. This is in the drier country on the Chilcotin Plateau. This is up on the Duffy. And it's, if we start to look for tracks and signs, it's surprising what's there. We, on our website at Coast to Cascades, we have a number you can call where you can report your grizzly bear sightings and answer some basic questions on how many were they, why did you think it was a grizzly bear, what was it doing, what were the signs. And so that will help us feed in information into Tony and other scientists to help build a body of knowledge on grizzly bears. So this is a little tour I'm going to give you really quickly for the different population units. Starting with the one closest to home here with Squamish-Lillooet, we've got some fabulous country and some great habitat. This is truly in our wilderness backyard. So this is, when we look here, that's Callahan Lake, and that's the divide between it and the Sioux. And so right now, Steve Rochetta could probably tell us if the bears have come out of their dens, but within 15, 20 kilometers of us, there's probably 4 grizzly bears in their dens right now. Some of them might be having cubs. And it's pretty cool to think that here we live in Whistler, and there's all these thousands and thousands of people that come skiing here every year and visiting in the summers. But while people are skiing down the slopes, these bears are asleep just less than 20 kilometers away from us. And if we were to expand that radius out to include the Upper Ryan River, northwest of Pemberton there, the Upper Ryan, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but it's a real hot spot for grizzly bears locally. And the Ryan, Steve, how many bears are asleep in the Ryan right now, probably? So 20 bears there, a handful close to us here. These bears are really able to hang out, if given half a chance, in these backs into these valleys, and they really stand a good chance of recovery if we give them half a chance. These are grizzly bear tracks on the divide between the Sioux and the Callahan. This was before the protected areas went in, the new ones up in the top there. And why would we think these are grizzly bears? Claws, right. Oops. Tony talked about Callie, a bear that lives up in the Upper Callahan. That's her. This is a big male that is in the Upper Elaho floodplain. Big, handsome guy. You see the hump on him. And then the Upper Ryan. So the Ryan is a river, as I mentioned, northwest of here. It was heavily logged in recent decades, but it's got a lot of avalanche tracks. It's got a lot of berries that are growing up where the logging's occurred, and the bridge is washed out, stopping all access up there. So the Ryan is arguably the single hotspot for grizzly bears within our area, and certainly one of the very top ones in this entire region. It's important for its habitat for the bears, and it's important as a stepping stone for connectivity towards the Squamish and north towards Tenquil and that. This is Shaggy up in the Ryan. You can tell probably why they call him Shaggy. This is Atlas going for one of the bait stations. And this is Atlas and Chloe, and this is Atlas and Chloe sniffing on a tree, K-I-S-S-I-N-G. They're probably that time of year. And what's good for bears is often good for a lot of other species. And Steve just sent these photos of this wolverine white socks, and this is one of their traps where they put little Barbie things on the sides to catch their hair to also do DNA work. And this is the bait that's hanging here. And if any of you have a blue heeler like I do, you know what that looks like. Yeah, it's a great way to help ID that wolverine. So in our Squamish-Lillooet GBPU, we have in the back ends of the valleys, we have some really important places. And some of them are important for habitat, and some of them are important for connectivity. This is Raccoon Pass at the head of the Clendenning River, and dropping over in the back here, this is a really super steep slope going into Toba. And grizzly bears use that. The Squamish First Nation people have been saying for years and years to the biologists that it's a heavy area of use for bears. This is the Upper Sims down up. It's a tributary of the Elaho down by Squamish, and again another untouched upper valley here, really important to bears regionally. I caught a flight to Prince George a few months ago, or before the winter, and it was a perfect morning, and so I got a few aerial shots here. This is also part of the Squamish-Lillooet population unit. This is over towards Narrows and Sunni Inlets, over towards the coast. This is Phantom, named after Phantom Lake, lives in that part of the world. And then there's the Garibaldi Pit. So Garibaldi Pit, the core of it is Garibaldi Park. The area around it is pretty heavily impacted by humans. The park is pretty stark. It's a lot of rock and ice, a lot of inhospitable habitat, and a lot of what people speculate used to be good bear habitat now looks like this, and also up in the Fraser Valley. That habitat has been lost to the bears. This is a little video that Nick Didlick took on a camera trap of a bear in the Upper Pitt River, which is 30 miles from downtown Vancouver, less, something like that. And so there's not an established population there, but again, give these animals half a chance, and they can do okay. In the Squamish First Nations Land Use Plan, which talks about protecting wildlife, Chief Bill Williams writes, for other animals such as grizzly and black bear, it should be a protection strategy. And he's correct when he says nowhere else in the world is there major grizzly bear habitat within a few hours of a major city. And it's important to make that space available for not just people, but for the bears too. So the South Chilcotin Ranges, lots of us in the room probably that have been hiking and biking know probably the South Chilcotin Mountains Park area in here, but it's a big area. Again, this is probably the experience most of us would know the park through. It's got great habitat, high and low, but it's also pretty rugged. The habitat's limited where it is. It comes down so far as to include the upper Lillooet Valley. That's going into Salal Creek here, and this is a park in the upper Lillooet Glacier, Silt Lake at the base of it, Lillooet River coming down. This is Silt, up in the very head of Lillooet. This is Boulder, who lives in Boulder Creek or Pebble Creek. And this is past, like if you were to start on the floor of the stage and come through here, this is heading north from Salal Creek, past the toe of the Bridge Glacier. And bears can move through this country, swim across here, walk across here, go into here, they drop into the Lord River Valley, into the Tesico, into the Chilco. And our bears, some of our bears do travel all the way up to the Chilco for feeding on bears or fish in the fall. And these are pictures from Jeremy Williams and Steve Ogle. Sorry guys, I didn't credit you. But the Chilco is a really, really important area for bears, for fattening up in the fall. In the Chilcotin, we have issues, conflicts sometimes with bears and ranchers, and one of the things C2C is doing is where we have somebody Jackie Rasmussen, who's doing some field work with ranchers, doing outreach. Stein to Hatlatch, Tony already talked about that population unit. There's some great habitat in it. This is up in the Barkley Valley in the Hailmore, south of Anderson Lake and Darcy. This is along the Duffy. This is Jinx again, one of the mother and daughter. Both those bears are dead now at the hands of humans. And then North Cascades. When people get a camera trap picture of a grizzly bear in the North Cascades, they get pretty excited. So this is an area that, again, our partners in the States are anxious to see the bear numbers increase. There was a plan to restock the area with grizzly bears to augment the population a while ago, but that was nixed by the minister at the time. So that's still a possible thing. So trying to keep it out of science speak, what do we need to do to keep and increase our grizzly bears? First of all, we have to stop killing them, especially in certain vital populations that are on the brink. Mortality is the term. At least 10 bears have been shot in our forest district in the last 8 years or so. 5 of them in the upper Lillooet. This is a picture of one of the bears that was shot. The fellow was caught and was charged. One of the Lillooet Nation's fisheries technicians found this bear when he was out in the field. So, minimize the number killed by humans and for any reason, and especially not to have females killed. With females being gone, it makes it really difficult. Lead them not into temptation. Habituation leads to mortality. Electric fencing is a key thing in outlying areas. The bear Homer got a taste for chickens and other human foods up in Goldbridge, Braylorn area. He's gone now. And give them somewhere to live. Don't push them out. Not displacing them. In places like Whistler here, it is what it is. But in other places up in the upper Lillooet, this is an old photo. This is before the slide down the Meager. This is Pebble Creek, Boulder Creek, and Salal Creek up here. We can do things to help them, just take it a little more easy on them and help them have a chance. And they need seasonal foods, high and low, and that comes down to habitat. Whether it's high, avalanche tracks, some bears in the valleys with salmon, and screening and bedding cover, so they feel secure when they're in the field and bedding down. And connectivity is a key thing. We talked about the parks being far apart from each other. This is the upper Lillooet River Valley, one of the key linkages that exist. But this is an aerial shot of, here's the upper Lillooet, here's Meager Creek coming in, there's a big slide on there. And so these green ribbons of valley are really, really important. I mean, this is where the bears are continuing to exist, primarily in the heads of these valleys, coming down to the floors when they need to. So the more we develop all these valleys, the less chance these bears will have to connect through the sea of rock and ice. When we push them out of the valleys, there's nowhere else for them to go. They don't eat rocks and ice. This is a shot looking into Taseko Lakes. For those of you who've been there, Warner Lake, Lorna Lake, Warner Pass. And for the populations that are really on the brink, augmentation, catching bears in another place and bringing them in. And then in the end, making sure that what is being done for the bears is monitored and the research keeps going on. So close to home, 6 years ago now, we had the Sea to Sky LRMP was completed, and there's some good stuff in there. They have an objective of recovery planning. Sorry for the text slides now, but it's, we want to manage for recovery, that's what the plan says, and the implementation direction says, do a recovery plan for each of these 4 populations that overlap the plan area, but don't just stop at the plan boundary, do the entire population plan area. So this fainter line is a Sea to Sky LRMP outline, and this is how our 4 population units in our part of the world overlap. The plan also said don't bother trying to protect or recover grizzly bears in some of our more developed areas in the corridor. We're not going to have grizzly bears in downtown Whistler. And that the LRMP objectives are good. They include all the things that a plan should have: mortality reduction, working on displacement, protecting habitat, doing connectivity. I'll go through this really quickly here, but Tony was talking about some of the, from the Sea to Sky report. This is the corridor from the Campbell Sump and the Rhine River up into Tenquil across the upper Lillooet. Another one here through Darcy, from the Stein to Hatlatch, coming down north into the South Chilcotin, and then connectivity across the upper Lillooet from the Garibaldi Pit to Stein to Hatlatch. Again, allowing these bears to fill one area and move through the other. We had an access management plan that was done as a result of the LRMP. It was a good start, but there's more work that needs to be done. The Statlium chiefs have had a resolution that is very strong about protecting grizzly bears. And they wish to have the management done so no later than the end of 7 generations we'll have bears here for time immemorial. So to keep and increase our grizzly bears, all of us kind of have to give a bit. There's a lot of us living in the corridor. We like to get out in the back country. There's industry, there's tourism, there's all sorts of things. So all of us have to figure out how we can just adjust our needs a little bit to keep our grizzly bears. Because if all of us want to do everything that we want to do in every place, to build every project, every IPP, log every last cut block, develop every tourism lodge, build a trail somewhere, that's going to make it hard for bears. So what would success look like for us? Bringing these populations back from the brink, healthy numbers, self-sustaining populations, and having people like you come out and learn more about these bears and have a broad acceptance for their existence on the land base. And maybe Whistler, tourism town, here we talk about tourism a lot, so maybe we could have grizzly bear being in our own backyard. This is on the Narco River in the Bella Coola Valley, and BC Parks has a great little stand. It's hard to see, but there's a grizzly bear there everybody's looking at. And it's not inconceivable that if once we recover our bears on some of the fish-bearing streams, we could do something like this when the time is appropriate. And then maybe that would be our big problem down the road and not the grizzly bear populations. Thank you.